trip to the Soviet Union, tour the Ukrainian countryside, and share in the musical tradition of the Ukraine's capital city, Lvov. But first, step back in time to exotic Morocco. The Ourika Valley is located 60 kilometers or 35 miles outside of Marrakesh. It's surrounded by hills, dotted with villages that seem to blend into the lush landscape. There's a picturesque mosque and an air of serenity. And in the center of it all, there's a bustling, thriving market.
Ourika Valley, there is a market called the Monday Market of Ourika. We still have the farmers market. Compared to what people are used to, for instance, in Europe or in Canada or in the States, farmers bring their goods and people from the cities or urban areas come and buy. But here, farmers market in Morocco is particularly for farmers. They come just for their own need.
Why are there so many donkeys along the river?
These people live in the mountains. And of course, when they live in the mountains, it's very difficult to have a moped and go all the way up to the mountains. So with a mule or a donkey, it's practical. And that area right there, it's along the river, and the river itself is called the Ourika River. And then that's the parking lot for their mules.
Did they pay for leaving their donkeys there?
Of course, they pay. They have to pay a dirham to a head, a dirham each donkey. But this market is a sort of a communicating part for these people that live in the mountains apart from each other. So when they come to the market, they do their shoppings and they meet, but they have a rendezvous or appointment. And then they go to the Berber cafes and then they sit. They even have to buy just the food that is cooked right there, or they buy vegetables, meat, and have what we call a tagine. It's a sort of a stew.
The majority of the Moroccan population is rural, and souks or markets are held out in the open country. For visitors, it's a chance to see how the people live and to be part of everyday Moroccan life. The snake charmers I find very interesting. Where did they come from?
They are called Aisawa. Aisawa means there's a tribe from the Meknasa Berbers up in Meknes. And in Aisawa itself, there are so many different sorts of folkloric, if I might say, activities. Then one of them are the snake charmers. These people are not afraid of snakes. These people, they can deal with any sorts of snakes, but they have to have music. And as you know, that snakes, if you put music and play music to them, they get hypnotized. So they don't think about biting you or anything, but they think about playing with the music that is taking their mind away from hurting you.
Hypnotic may also be the word for fantasia. The entertainment and dining one can experience seems right out of 1001 Arabian Nights. Fantasia to me, Mohammed, was what I imagined Morocco always to be. Is it just a tourist attraction?
Well, I would say it's set up in an atmosphere which is not strange to Moroccans, but is strange to the visitors. And to their eyes, when you observe not from the place, we think that it's set up purposely for them. But that's not the case. The Moroccans, during festivities, celebrating a sort of a national holiday, or during just a marriage, you have the setup of tents along the villages. So at the end, you have the horses and the fantasia itself. Between Moroccans and horses, there is a love. They love horses. And of course, the fantasia itself is just a folkloric celebration.
Coming up, discover Marrakesh in Morocco. Marrakesh is a Moroccan city of 500,000 people that offers an inside look at the old and new Moroccan way of life.
In Marrakesh, describing it, you have 4 different colors. You have the red in the walls, the green on the fields, you have the blue skies, and at the background, you have the snow covering the mountains. When a tourist comes, he's got everything he wants. The exotic part of the town and the modern part. But what he really is looking for is this exotic part. Within the city, at 1 or 2 kilometers, there are some, what we call the imperial gardens. They were founded by some dynasties, or one dynasty in particular, the Almohads, during the 12th century. What remains of it are the ruins, and purposely we don't want to restore it because that would spoil the charm of the view and the pool and everything.
In Morocco, markets are a way of life, and it's a tradition to haggle and bargain over price. And at the market, you meet the people.
One advantage you have when you go to the souk, that you communicate with the real people, just ordinary people. Then you get to communicate with them. They invite you to sit down. They bring you mint tea. They talk to you about different things, where you're from, so on, just to get into conversation. And buying, it's to your choice. And of course, if you want the folkloric way of doing the shoppings, you go to the Medina, the old Medina, the souks. Then you have to bargain. And when you're bargaining, of course, you're having fun. That's something that you're not used to. You go to the spice market. You have herbs, you have different sorts of other things laid down on the ground. So from there, you go to see the craftsmen or the artisans. So if you're looking for something that is unusual, you go, for instance, to the blacksmiths. And from that, you go to see the leather market, what we call the Marocanerie, with the Q-U-E. That's a word that was put by the French. Through history, they used to import leather from Morocco, and everything that comes in leather to Europe and mainly to France was called Marocanerie. And in Marocanerie, you have Morocco within it. From there, you can go to the wall dyes. So they dye their wool there. Now they dye clothing. If you have a used clothes that the color runs out, you can just take it there and have it being colored again and looks new.
No show of popular folklore is complete in Morocco without music and dance. And visitors don't have to look too far to see unusual outdoor performances.
Those performers, acrobats for instance, they are there every day. So they are there for infinity, generation after generation. The same families always doing acrobats. So they dancing to the beat, and the beat is through tambourines and a flute. And of course they have a master, if I must say, that would tell them what to do and giving them time to do things. And of course, they do it. And one thing that any tourist would notice is people, if they are entertaining, they entertain with a smile, meaning that they are happy to do it. The Gnawa dancers, they're originally from Africa, but it is transformed to the folkloric way of life that is back in the Great Atlas Mountains and way behind in the desert. So they dance with the castanet, metal castanet, and the sound of a tambourine. That's for real. That's not something that people would think that is a plastic snake he's playing around with. That's a real snake, poisonous. They don't milk them. Poison is there. But they are gifted in a way to charm the snake itself. And of course, to you, to me, that is not into that business, of course, it's too dangerous. And it's for real, and it's there.
A trip to Marrakesh is like traveling back in time. Yet all the comforts of a modern city are at hand. It's a city full of unforgettable faces and places. Coming up on the Travel Magazine, a trip to the Ukraine in the Soviet Union.
When you think of the Soviet Union, this is probably not the image that comes to mind. Hello, I'm Matthew Cope, and we're in the city of Lvov, capital of the Western Ukraine. Lvov really stands at the crossroads, reflecting the influences not only of the Ukraine, but of the succession of countries which have ruled this region through the centuries. Lvov, or Lviv as it's pronounced in Ukrainian, is filled with reminders of the past.
I think one of the most unique aspects of our time in Lviv has been the array of architecture, starting from the medieval times through the 18th century Baroque, in comparison to many of the other cities we've been in Russia. It has not been destroyed during World War II, so we're getting a feel of how rich this country is and was culturally.
Rynok, or Market Square, is like an architectural sampler of the centuries. Situated in the center of the city, it's one of the oldest sections in Lvov and a good place to begin to explore. There are 41 houses within the square. The old city hall, now the city Soviet, marks the center. Surrounding Market Square is an impressive array of cathedrals and churches. And overlooking the square is one of the oldest churches in Lvov, St. George's.
It's Baroque. It's a beautiful example of the Lvov Baroque style. And the interesting thing is that the first Orthodox church, St. George's Church, was built on this hill. And maybe you've noticed that the city was built it's on the hills, it's not in the valley. So was constructed here in the 13th century and in the suburbs of the medieval town. The construction of this beautiful cathedral was started in the 18th century, And it is now the main Orthodox cathedral in our province.
Just outside the city, you can see traditional Ukrainian folk architecture in an outdoor exhibition set in beautiful parkland.
The official name of this museum, the Museum of the Ukrainian Folk Wooden Architecture and Mode of Life, or we call it the Heritage Museum. And the people come here to see the houses and churches, chapels, watermills, mills, schools. So mostly the wooden Ukrainian architecture of the Western Ukraine is presented here. And everything people see here, it's original. It's just the way how their grandfathers, their great-grandfathers used to live. And the interiors of the houses present the typical interiors, so they just imagine how people used to live.
Lvov has been called a city museum because of the 16 different museums within the city. One of the most interesting collections is in the Museum of Ukrainian Fine Arts. Here you can find one of the richest displays of icons and Western Ukrainian paintings and carefully preserved Ukrainian folk art. This stuff is really beautiful, but I want to know, is it just in museum cases, or are people still really doing this for real?
Yeah, sure. People still do this, and they wear these clothes like blouses and shirts, embroidered shirts, when we have different festivals, art festivals. And sometimes even on Sundays they like to wear these clothes. But sometimes people come here, especially women who do this embroidery, they come here and they copy the designs, the ornaments. So people come and copy, and they do the same at home.
Another aspect that we have found to be very rewarding is the cultural aspects of the Russian society and the low cost for entrance to these functions. For instance, there are folk dances and songs available, and culturally I would say that the Russian people are probably one of the richest societies.
You know, music is a tremendously important part of the cultural life of the Western Ukraine, and all styles and kinds of music are available, from rock and roll to traditional folk songs, contemporary folk ballads. And behind me is the Lvov Opera House, which is one of the few places in the world where you can see Ukrainian folk opera.
This is one of the brightest characters in Ukrainian folklore. He symbolizes the person who is a true patriot of his country, who is eager to come back to the Ukraine, who loves his motherland. And this is my favorite role, my favorite character.
Outdoor folk festivals like this one in nearby Chernovtsi are a celebration of the history of musical tradition in the Ukraine.
It looks like there's a big movement to regain some of our history, not just the more recent past of the 30s and the Stalinist era, but also the older past, the history which really goes back even way beyond the coming of Christianity to Kiev 1,000 years ago. So people are starting to fight to recapture that. I mean, up until right now, there still apparently aren't any Ukrainian history courses. So it's the movement right now is to fight that kind of attitude and recapture as much of our past and traditions and culture as possible.
While some visitors come strictly as tourists, there are many for whom a visit to Lvov is a kind of homecoming.
I've never been here before. It's my first time. I was born in Canada. But definitely I come here, I studied the history. My parents taught me the language. So definitely it was very emotional, especially here in the West. I have a little bit of family, so we all cried. And here I can speak the language quite freely.
But when I came to Lviv, I just felt I was born again, and all the emotions came back and tears to my eyes. And I just felt that 45 years were lost, that I'm just here and never left. And especially when people are so free to talk and nationalism is born. They don't really care much if they have enough soap or enough this and that, but that replaces for them that they could speak their own language now, and they could have a yellow and blue flag, and that lifts them up. And they have a cultural life. They have theaters, they have opera, and that's what subsidizes them. And families have small apartments, but they very close family. That ties them together.
Well, that's it for this edition of the Travel Magazine. From Lvov in the Western Ukraine, I'm Matthew Cope. See you next time.